Hey guys, in this video I'm really excited to show you guys the latest build I've been working on for the last week or so, which is my Warcry Explosion Necro, using Unearth to spawn really high life corpses and automated Warcries with the Eternal Apple to trigger the explosion from these charms from the Primalist Wildwood Ascendancy. Stacking 3 of these charms and one that which was taken jewel, you can do 24% monster life explosions, which is a ton of damage with Unearth, but it can make for even crazier damage in, for example, Maven's Invitations, where you have huge bosses next to each other that can explode. But even though Invitations is where this build really shines, I've actually been able to down all the uber bosses as well, and I think it's got pretty good clear speed for general mapping too. I'd say it's a little bit of a glass cannon, but it's something I've been working on while progressing through the ubers. Trying different setups over the last week, I'm pretty comfortable with my current one, which is a little bit tankier. The budget for this build was relatively low for me, maybe 20 to 30 divines or so, but it does use some pretty niche items, which can be a little tricky to get. So I will go over some of the different gearing options and talk about some of the different setups that I've tried in the gearing sections, and possibly talk about some of the different Ascendancy classes that could work other than Necro. But first, I just want to say, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. I'd really appreciate it. I've been working really hard on this build, and it's completely reliant on these Affliction specific charms, which might not go core, so this league might be the only chance to play a build like this. So if you think it looks fun, you should go for it, and let me know if you have any questions about the build or any input. But yeah, that's about it. Let's get into the guide. Okay, so there's a lot to go over here. There's a lot of kind of weird mechanics going on, and it's a pretty complicated character, but I'll try to be pretty concise and just focus on what's important. And first off, I just want to say, when you level this character, there's no easy progression. Like, we are completely reliant on the charms, which you unlock through this quest line in the Wildwood. So the way I did it is I just played as Armageddon Brand and Cremation through the acts, and then I followed like a DD guide, and I just played DD up until level 90, and I have all my charm slots unlocked. Of course, you could, for example, get boosted through your charm slots, like with Black Morrigan and King in the Mists being the hard quests. And then I guess you could level in like 5 ways, but of course it doesn't work as a league starter. And even if you have currency lying around and you have all the items needed, you still will need to progress through the Wildwood Ascendancy quest line to get the charms. So the progression is not really easy. You can follow, I guess, any witch build. As long as you're the Witch Ascendancy, you can transition into this. Maybe already have a character, or maybe, yeah, you just play sort of another build until you're ready to transition into this. But maybe I will just link to some elementalist DD guide, or maybe I will just make sort of my own. I'm not a good DD player, but yeah, I just played DD Necro, and it worked fine. And I made sure I got everything that I needed until, before I started this actual build. Okay, so as far as the character goes, I'm currently level 97. I guess I'll start off by talking a little bit how I'm automating the Warcries, and that is through the Eternal Apple, which triggers a socketed Warcry skill on losing endurance charges with a small cooldown. And then it also has you lose all endurance charges on reaching maximum. But that's not how I'm choosing to lose endurance charges, which is how you trigger the Warcries. The way I'm doing it is, so first off, to gain endurance charges, I'm using Precursor's Emblem with this mod right here that says, gain 1 endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently. And then I'm hitting myself by using Forbidden Rite, and I'm automating the Forbidden Rite by using trigger a socketed spell on using a skill with a 4-second cooldown, which is an Unveil mod. And I'll talk about how you can craft a scepter like this later. But yeah, that's the important thing. You trigger a socketed skill, a spell on using a skill. So I'm triggering the Forbidden Rite. The Forbidden Rite makes it so I take damage. The Precursor makes it so I gain endurance charges if I've been hit. Then the way I'm losing them is through this jewel right here, Replica Fragility. Lose an endurance charge each second. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. That's the setup that allows me to just use Unearth, making it like a one-button build other than your utility skills, basically. So yeah, that's the setup I'm using to automate my Warcries. Now, as far as the gear goes, I'll just go over the gear and then the gems, and then I guess the passive tree. Maybe I'll jump around a little bit to explain some stuff. I'll talk about some different ways you can gear, but yeah. What I'm using right now is a scepter like this. So I just have a fracture with minions deal increased damage, because that's one of the few mods that actually work. The explosions don't scale on like spell damage or attack damage. And obviously you can't scale them with support gems or anything because it's not a skill. So you need generic sources of damage. And because I have Spiritual Aid, minion damage works. So yeah, minion damage fracture. This cost me like 2 divines. And then you just spam Veiled Chaos Orbs on it until you hit a suffix. And when you hit a suffix, you can block a mod to increase the odds of getting the veiled mod that you want. I usually do this one because I think it blocks 3 mods. And yeah, then you just unveil and hope for the best. And then if you have an open prefix, you can craft cold damage as extra chaos damage. There's not really any other... I guess you could have a fracture for cold damage or something like that. But yeah, there's not a lot of mods that actually affect the explosions. There are some good ones on, I think, Redeemer scepters. Like you can get Hatred effect and Piss as extra cold. But yeah, for simplicity's sake, I just crafted one like this. It was pretty cheap, pretty simple. So that's the weapon I'm using. I'm using an Honor Home, and this is where I have my Unearth. Now this is double corrupted. You don't need to have it double corrupted, it just gives more damage. The important thing about Unearth that it only increases the level of spawned corpses every 2 levels, so on even levels. So you just want to avoid having odd levels. So if I were to use a scepter like this that gives +1 and I would get to 33, then that one level doesn't really do anything. It just increases the damage of the actual Unearth, which is not it's not nothing, but it's like 500,000 or something. So not 500,000 per level, just like my Unearth is doing like something like 500k DPS. So one level here or there doesn't really matter. You want even levels on the Unearth. But yeah, if you can get a double corrupted one like this, AoE and projectile gems are the ones that scale Unearth on a helm. You should go for it. If you can just get one of them, that's fine, no problem. Just a little bit less damage. And then it has baseline +2 to socketed gems, so that's why I'm choosing that one for the corruptions. So +2 levels, that's 2 levels on Unearth and on Empower. And then it also gives reduced mana cost of skills, which is pretty useful too. And then I'm using Defiance of Destiny. So this made the build a lot tankier. In some of the clips you saw earlier, I was maybe not using it, but I've decided to, yeah, stick with Defiance of Destiny. This one really helped me kill Uber Exarch, because before that I was getting like one-shotted by anything. Well, it doesn't really help that much with just one-shots, but since we don't have spell suppression, yeah, it helps versus hits a lot. And on some fights where dots are the biggest problem, it's not as useful, but versus hits, it's really important. It also just has really solid stats. So before that, I was using Replica's Dragonfang's Flight with +3 to Unearth. So when I was using that, of course, this gives +3. I don't want uneven levels, so then I was using a +1 Scepter as well. that's a setup that gives a little bit more damage. Defiance of Destiny makes you more tankier. It's sort of up to you, but I prefer Defiance of Destiny setup. And then, of course, I already went over the Eternal Apple, but it does have some other things like life and chaos res, which is good. But then it gives you cannot block, so keep in mind you don't want any extra block stuff because you can't block anyway, not attacks or spells or anything. So yeah, no blocking. And the precursors. So of course you need the gain 1 endurance charge mod, but I also have apply an additional curse. I'm applying curses through the scepter. Because of course the triggered skills don't share a cooldown, so that's another important thing about the scepter. That's how I'm applying curses. But if you don't have one of these that gives an additional curse, because that could be hard to get, I don't know how many there are on the market. I bought this one pretty cheaply, but I'm not sure there's a lot of them out there. So then you could anoint Whispers of Doom, but then you will lose some cooldown recovery rate. You could possibly use a chest that gives +1 curse, or you could just use 1 curse. Or alternatively, there's one other option. You can get this mod, gain 1 endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently, on small cluster jewels. It's called Enduring Composure. So in a slightly different setup, you could get it there as well. But otherwise, you might just have to forgo a curse, unless you can get one like this, or get +1 curse somewhere else, like on an amulet implicit, like a corruption or an anoint. But yeah, I don't want to talk too much about that, but yeah, there's some... These two items can be a little bit hard to get exactly ones like this, but there's ways to work around that. Or you could just accept that you're gonna have a little bit less damage. And then for my boots, I'm using Relic Impatience. So there's no way I'm gonna have endurance charges, because if I would get maximum, I would just lose them. But the whole setup is reliant on like losing endurance charges, so the only way for me to get endurance charges is pretty much through these boots, and it just makes it so you count as having maximum. It's also really nice to have frenzy charges, because frenzy charges gives more damage, and yeah, it's generic more damage. It's not attack damage or spell damage, so it works with the explosions. And then the power charges we don't really benefit from, but yeah, they're there anyways. So yeah, we don't crit, so we don't really get anything from the power charges. Okay, and the belt here, you just want life and resist. Getting chaos resistance is pretty important. You want to get that on your rares, because the Forbidden Rite hits you with chaos damage, and having chaos res will mitigate that. So keep in mind, you want to preferably cap your chaos res like I have. The other resists are really easy to cap anyways, because we get some from being a Necro, and then yeah, we just get a lot on the gear, I guess. My cold resistance is super overcapped, so as you can see, I haven't really min-maxed my gear. Most of the gear is pretty simple, pretty cheap. It's just some things that are kind of niche. But yeah, moving on. My gloves look like this. So you want to have the implicit that converts to cold damage, and then also the craft that converts to cold damage. So the Warcries the explosions, they do physical damage to start with. So I decided to convert it all to cold to make it easier to scale. So my sources of cold conversion are these gloves on the implicit and the craft, and then on the tree here, the cold mastery, and then lastly on a Warcher's Eye jewel. So that's how I'm converting to cold. It makes it easier to scale damage, and it also, we can pretty much perma-freeze even uber bosses, because well, we get some duration from the quality here on elemental weakness and frostbite, and yeah, we can pretty much perma-freeze anything. It's easier to scale damage with because now we can use elemental damage to scale it, and you can use pen and stuff like that. So that's why I decided to convert the explosions to cold. And then for a ring here, I just want, yeah, life, resists, and strength and dexterity is also kind of important. yeah, you don't have to worry about int. We get a lot of int, but strength and dex for the gear and the gems is required. And then my chest looks like this. It's really bad. It was really simple to craft. I decided not to go overboard with it. I just stopped on the first like decent craft I got when I was switching over from the doppelgangers guys. So yeah, I just bought one of these with fractured spell damage, suppressed spell damage. It cost like one or two divines, and then I just you can use chaos essences or chaos res essences or life essences to craft it, and then you just want to craft in the bench one of these regenerate energy shield mods while a rare or unique enemy is nearby. We have Eldritch Battery with Mind Over Matter, so we need to have consistent ES regen. We have some other sources as well, but getting this mod helps a lot. You can get that on belt as well. Doesn't matter on which one you have it, and you only need one of them. So yeah, the rares are pretty simple. They're not overly crafted or anything. Yeah, Defiance of Destiny is the tankier choice, but you can use a replicas setup as well. I think that's about it for the gear. On this jewel, yeah, just getting some life and dexterity was pretty important as well. ES regen helps, but it's not mandatory. Yeah, I think that's about it for the gear. Again, I don't want to go over. I don't want to go on for too long, so I'll just get into the gems now. Okay, on the gems, of course, I'm using the Forbidden Rite, and then my 2 curses in here, in the weapon to trigger them. That's a pretty simple setup. Quality here is pretty good to make sure you're freezing stuff. In the Honor Home, I'm using Unearth with Enhance, Greater Volley, and Empower. Greater Volley just makes you spawn more corpses. You're spawning, I guess, 5 corpses, 1 baseline, and then +4. You're usually hitting with at least 4 of them. They're not perfectly close together, but yeah. You want to preferably cast it 3 times when you before your Warcry explodes, so you can have 12 corpses out at any time. +2 from this, and then it's 10 baseline on Unearth. So you're casting it 3 times and then letting your Warcry go off. But you're never gonna have a perfect rotation, so... But yeah, Greater Volley, and then lastly Empower, just for higher levels. And yeah, just make sure you have even levels on the Unearth. And then the Warcries I'm using is General's Cry. This has the lowest cooldown. And then Intimidating Cry, this doesn't do anything. Just make sure you have quality on it to increase the cooldown recovery rate. Then I have Infernal Cry. This makes it so affected monsters explode, I guess. Which is kind of... it helps with the clear a little bit, but it could mess up if you're doing invitations. You don't want... to explode the corpses with this one, so you could just use any other Warcry as well. Just make sure it has quality. But yeah, the Infernal Cry, it helps with clear, but it could potentially mess up and explode an important corpse that you want to be exploded by the Warcries instead. So keep that in mind. If you're doing invitations, you might want to switch the Infernal Cry out. But I've been using it and I haven't really noticed any problems with it, so for right now I'm just using it. And then my aura setup over here is Determination with Hatred, Herald of Ash, and I'm supporting it with Enlighten to make it work with the mana reservation. Determination, yeah, just a bunch of armor. Hatred is the best scaling offensive aura, and the Herald of Ash helps with clear, but also helps with the damage a lot. And then I'm actually using a Herald of Purity as well over here. Again, this is just more damage. And then I have a setup over here with Shield Charge and faster attacks. So that's how we shield charge around in maps. It's pretty bad for bossing, so that's why I also have a Flame Dash over here, which is a little bit better mobility for boss fights, I would say, than Shield Charge, because, yeah, Shield Charge just messes some things up. So you want to have both, I think. And then I have a Molten Shell, just bound to my left click, so it goes off every now and then. And then I have Val Molten Shell to press when I need to. And then I actually have a Spectre setup here. So it's Raise Spectre, Guardian's Blessing, Elemental Army with Grace, and then Meat Shield to make them a little tankier. Elemental Army also applies exposure when they hit, as long as their biggest hit is cold, which it is because we have hatred, we're giving them hatred, so they give cold exposure. Now the ones I'm using are called the Perfect Dark Marionette, and they're sold by the Warlock, or you can just buy them on the website, on the trading website. They're like 30 chaos or something like that. And that just makes it so when I press this Grace, they start taking damage. But as you will see, this specific monster type, they actually just respawn when they die. So they die and they're right back. And we have to press the aura again. But if they die at different times, then the aura will still keep going. So that's what Guardian's Blessing support does. It makes them take damage, but you can put in an aura with them. Now this Grace is really low level. I've played around with some other auras. You could use haste. You could use Purity of Elements if you want ailment immunity. I'm pretty much ailment immune anyway, but for example, when I'm taking Lethe Shade for something like Sirus, then I was using Purity of Elements. And I guess that's it for the gem setup. I'm gonna talk a little about the tree now and some of the jewels, and I guess before that I can talk about the flasks. Yeah, I'm using a life flask with corrupted blood immunity. This should probably be fully instant, but I guess I haven't bothered doing that. I've been switching around my flasks a little bit. Actually, let's just do this. Make sure it's 20% quality, and yeah, you can get a seething or an effusive. I'm using a granite flask because I'm using determination with, so you need some armor. We're stacking like armor and we need ES and evasion. So we're stacking all types of defenses. So getting a granite is a pretty good way to get your armor up. And then a quartz flask for a little bit of extra spell suppression, but also phasing. And then getting an armor mod here is pretty good too. I think we get something like almost 20k armor when we have everything up.
When I'm ready.
And then a quicksilver flask for just faster movement speed, and then Taste of Hate. Now I'm using one of these enkindling orb on it to make it more effective, just have more effect. I found for bossing, having the more effect is just better. For mapping, it could be nicer to have the uptime because it gains no charges during effect when you have that. But for bossing, that doesn't really matter, so I'm pretty much running the enkindling orb on it all the time, but for mapping, you don't have to. Okay, yeah, so now I'm gonna go over the tree. Okay, so Ascendancies first. I am a Necro. The main reason I'm Necro is because of these two nodes, Plaguebringer and Corpse Pact. So Plaguebringer says if you've consumed a corpse recently, you and your minions have increased the area of effect. So the way I'm consuming corpses is with this recovery mastery over here. Just every 3 seconds, consume a nearby corpse. On a boss fight, of course, you're spawning corpses with Unearth. In mapping, there's always corpses around. So you get that free AoE, which helps your corpses overlap, but also just helps with your AoE in clearing. And then with at least one nearby corpse, you gain 10% more damage and 10% reduced damage for enemies. So yeah, there's always nearby corpses, pretty much. So 10% more damage, 10% reduced damage taken, or reduced damage dealt by enemies, and then some AoE. And then Corpse Pact makes it so enemies near the corpses we spawn are shocked. So that's how we're shocking. And then they're also shield. We are doing cold damage anyway, so the shield doesn't really matter. But it can help a little bit when there's a delay between you casting the Unearth, and maybe the Unearth doesn't hit the enemy or all the enemies, and then it can still shield some nearby enemies until your explosion happens. It also gives 2%, I guess, cast speed because we're not consuming many corpses, so that part is kind of negligible. And then of course we have Commander of Darkness, which gives some increased damage and some increased resistances. With my current setup, the resistances aren't super important, because yeah, I'm just getting a lot of resists from my gear. But when I was using the doppelgangers and the Dragonfang's Flight, these resistances helped out more. So depending on your gear, that can be really useful. And then of course there's 30% increased damage straight up, and then some increased attack speed and cast speed. So attack speed helps with your shield charge, and the cast speed helps with your unearth. So it's pretty decent. And then I have Essence Glutton. Again, I am consuming corpses from the mastery, so when we consume a corpse, we gain 8% ES over 2 seconds and mana. But we don't care about the mana because we're using EB. But then we also have, for each nearby corpse, we get some ES regen. So this is probably the least important one, but it helps with keeping your ES up with Mind Over Matter as well. Which, especially when you're taking dots, your ES goes down really fast. So having some ES regen is pretty important. But yeah, there's nothing super overpowered about being a Necro, so that's why, like I talked about in the intro, there might be some other Ascendancies options that are really good too. Like I'm thinking Saboteur might be pretty good for the cooldown recovery and the area damage stuff, which I believe area damage does work. So Saboteur could work, Ascendant could also work. I don't know, maybe there's a Templar Ascendancy that could work. Yeah. I think Occultist, probably even Elementalist could do something too. Yeah, there's definitely some things you could play around with if you just want to use this as sort of a base model for your character. But yeah, and then of course for the Wildwood, you have to take Might of the Bear, and then you're just taking 3 charm sockets. So of course this is the mod that the build is made around. Nearby corpses explode when you Warcry, dealing 6% of their life as physical damage. You want to make sure this is max rolled at 6%. And then the other mod doesn't matter that much. Like you can get this reduced ignite duration on you. I have 2 of those, and then I have it on that which was taken as well. So yeah, you have 4 sources of this mod. You get 3 of these charms and the jewel. On the jewel, getting spell suppression is nice. Reduced ignite duration, just make sure you have 100%. You could either have it on all 3 of these or on here. Here I get a little bit of strength. The intelligence doesn't matter. But yeah, that's the charms and the jewel and the Ascendancies. Now for the rest of the tree. So we're starting at Witch, of course. We're going up and grabbing Mind Over Matter, some of these nodes, just a little bit of life, and some attributes and resist. Up here we have a cluster. I didn't really put too much effort into this cluster. I just basically I want it for the jewel slots. Battle Hardened is nice, increased fist damage and evasion and armor, which we're using both of those. And then Force Multiplier, double damage. Dealing double damage is nice to freeze, and then some increased fist damage. Getting some chaos res here is nice. And then I'm using Forbidden Flame and Flesh for Frigid Wake, which gives more cold damage, and it also gives you freeze and chill immunity, I believe. Definitely freeze. Yeah, freeze and chill immunity. And it also freezes nearby enemies now and then. So we are definitely freezing even Uber bosses pretty much all the time. But of course they don't actually get frozen, but they act as if they were frozen, more or less. And then we're going down here, taking this aura stuff and life. Spiritual Aid, of course, is very important because we have a lot of sources of minion damage. It just gives us an extra way to scale damage. Getting these life nodes, this mastery here. 3% chance for 300% fist damage, so fist is extra, sorry. So that's a big burst of damage when that happens. Also helps with the freezes. And then we take 1 endurance charge. Of course, we have replica fragility over here. And we have the Watcher's Eye over here. If you can get two mods, that's awesome, but the important one is the fist damage conversion. Over here we just have a mana mastery for some reservation, some life stuff. This here is for heralds, gives us quite a bit of damage. Here's the conversion. Duration of cold ailments is pretty good for the freezes. This gives us a little bit of recoup. Now with this mastery right here, this gives us a lot of damage on like uber bosses once we've been freezing them for a little bit, for 10 seconds in total, which that takes a little bit of time because not every hit is freezing. And but yeah, towards the end of the fight they're taking 50% more damage. Well, not exactly 50% more because we were shocking as well, and they don't exactly stack like that, but yeah, it's a nice way. It's a good thing to have. It gives a lot of damage, even though it's not super good synergy with the shocking that we're doing. I still wanted to get these points. Also, Winter's Embrace just makes it easier to freeze and gives a little bit of extra damage to when you've shattered. Unfortunately, I need to take this 30-point dexterity, which is kind of ugly, but yeah, the character isn't really fully min-maxed, so yeah. Then we have these nodes here, which are really good. These are 5% increased max life for corpses, and then this makes it so we can have more corpses out. So just basically more damage, and then a little bit of damage and life regen when we consume, which is pretty much all the time, every 3 seconds. Then here I have an immutable force to deal with stun, because since I'm freeze immune, I didn't really want to run Soul of the Brine King, so I'm running Soul of Arakali. But yeah, I needed some way to deal with stuns when I'm not using Brine King, so I decided to take these 3 points to get an immutable force. Depending on your setup, you could run Brine King, and yeah, but I think this setup is decent. At least when you have as many points as I do at level 97. Then yeah, here we have Spell Suppression Mastery. This just makes it so it rolls twice, which is really important when you're not capped, which I'm not. And then this gives us a little bit of lowered resistance and more cold damage. And then just some life in ES. You want as much life in ES as possible. I would preferably get a little bit higher ES, but it's fine the way it is. And then I have a Reservation Master here. Auras have increased effect on you. The other one I have is just increased damage per Herald affecting you, or Aura or Herald. So yeah, these points are kind of optional, but I kind of need a reservation, so I decided to go here. And then yeah, of course, we're taking Eldritch Battery, so we are using Mind Over Matter with Eldritch Batteries, so yeah, that gives us, it makes us a little bit more tanky. And we're getting some like pretty free ES regen from the Ascendancy and stuff like that anyway, so I think it's a good defensive layer to have. It gets a little bit annoying sometimes. You're not going to be able to cast if you don't have good regen, but I think it's worth it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the tree. There's, like I mentioned, there's a lot to go over with this character. It's pretty complicated, so if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. Make sure to look through the POB and check out any details that maybe I might have missed, or like I said, just go ahead and ask anything and I'll be happy to answer. But I think that's pretty much it for the character right now. I'll put some clip at the end maybe, and yeah, thanks a lot for watching.